Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Supercut. Today's concept is going to be every time in 2025 we saw somebody be a terrible example of sportsmanship. Now, full disclosure, there will be one clip that features somebody who isn't actually an MLB player, but was too good to ignore. Expect that in the latter half of the video. Also, if there's anything I mentioned that may seem a little out of date, keep in mind that this is previously released content, but I don't think that should overall affect the video too much, as these plays do exist in a relative vacuum in my opinion. With that being said, I hope you enjoy. I've been debating all day today on whether or not I wanted to make a video about the actions of Juan Soto yesterday, because I've seen so many people talking about it online, and I honestly don't want to add to a narrative that I think might be a bit overblown. But after examining the footage on a couple different plays, as well as seeing a couple takes that I thought were valid on the whole situation, I decided I'd go ahead and talk about it, with it being the fact that Juan Soto probably just had his single laziest contest as a member of the Mets. Things got started in the first when Aaron Judge hit this fly ball down the right field line, a ball that had an expected batting average of just 166. You heard me correctly, 166, but due to the fact that Soto was just kinda lackadaisically sauntering after it, it ended up dropping in and then bouncing out of the field of play for a ground rule double. And yeah, obviously the guy's not a good fielder, this is known, but it didn't end there, as later in the contest with the score tied 2-2 in the top of the 8th, he would be up versus Devin Williams, taking a weak swing on a 1-1 pitch, in the process grounding it weakly up the middle. DJ LeMahieu then made a nice sliding stop before fumbling with the ball, yet still having enough time to flip it to first to get the lefty. How is this even possible, you might ask? Well, not only did he not hustle out of the box, but even after seeing LeMahieu was fumbling with it, he still didn't turn on whatever jets he had to try to reach. There was obviously that moment with the grand slam in the bottom of the inning as well, but honestly I don't think that was really a lack of effort, more so just bad timing. I will admit he certainly looked discouraged after the play, but that's not necessarily atypical considering the magnitude of the moment. The last thing I see as relevant I want to bring up was from this post on Twitter by 4 Trained Savages, which does a good job of summarizing my last angle, even if the original intention of it was a little troll. He just didn't have any swag all series, something he had in spades last season. At the time, I think this strongly helped make up for the fact that he does have some of these lackadaisical plays sometimes. I don't know exactly what's up with him right now, but I do hope he's able to get it figured out soon enough. As being a general baseball fan without a horse in the New York versus New York race, I'd personally really like to see him have a strong first impression for the Mets, as he attempts to embark on his decade-and-a-half quest to make that gargantuan, historic contract worth it. The Orioles are having one of the worst starts to a season of any MLB team so far, currently rocking a 21-36 record that is only marginally better than the 18-40 White Sox team they're currently playing. But at least prior to yesterday they conducted themselves professionally, even if they weren't performing like it. But I believe during Saturday's game versus the Chi Sox, they saw one of their young players perpetrate the most Bush League moment of the year we've seen so far. After Jackson Holliday led off the game for Baltimore with a home run, each of these basement dwellers proceeded to trade zeros until the 4th inning, when Colby Mayo, he of the 107 career batting average through 62 plate appearances, a -8 OPS plus, lined a cutter into left field, netting him his first career RBI in his 22nd game played. But as he rounded first to try to get into scoring position, he got trapped in a rundown, courtesy of a cutoff being made successfully. It was towards the end of this rundown that he turned back towards second and then dove out of the baseline into infielder Lenyn Sosa, as you can see here in the replay. After the game, he would claim that the reason he did so was because he believed Sosa was in the base path, but it was actually him who dove into the infield grass to try to make contact with the guy multiple feet to his left. This was obviously extremely Bush League, but it wasn't even the worst part of the play itself in my opinion, as afterwards, when Sosa demanded an explanation for this display of stupidity, he proceeded to shove the infielder, prompting the benches to empty. I think this tweet from Evan Daniel perfectly captures my feelings on it. That was a real fake, tough guy move. Honestly, just a bad look coming from a player who has nearly 5 times as many strikeouts as career hits up to this point. While Baltimore would go on to win this one 4-2 after closer Felix Bautista struck out Austin Slater looking at a splitter, because of where they're at in the standings right now, I think the biggest thing that's going to be taken away from this game looking back is going to be the actions of Mayo, who just gave Baltimore fans yet another reason to be frustrated with their team. Nick Castellanos was taken out of a close game yesterday versus Atlanta, and after the contest, was asked a couple leading questions by Philadelphia reporters. First, if it was hard adjusting to a role where he's not the every-inning right fielder, to which he responded, yes, in a semi-aggravated tone. He would then go on to be asked if he was frustrated that even though he apparently has been seeing improvements in the outfield, he's still getting pulled, which would elicit the same response.
Yes.
Important context here as well is the fact that this is after a win. Now, I know that some people might not consider this to be complaining per se, but in my opinion, with the kind of media landscape in Philadelphia, this is as close to a direct statement of frustration as you'll ever see, barring just blatant honesty. What's more, this is the second time this season that there's been some controversy over him getting pulled. I want to say first, while addressing this, that I understand these are major league players we're talking about here, who are highly competitive, and to Nick's credit, he had made a good play earlier on in the contest when he threw out Matt Olson at the plate. But one highlight doesn't make up for what has been now years of defensive ineptitude that hasn't really gotten much better season to season, as in his career so far, he has been by far, and I do mean far, the worst defensive player in baseball, including registering a negative 91 fielding run value, almost doubly as bad as the next player on the list, being his teammate Kyle Schwarber, and negative 138 defensive runs saved. And this year is no different, as he currently is last among all MLB players in FRV at negative 13. The only real positive angle you can take here is the fact that his negative 13 DRS is only 4th worst in the sport. All this is to say that him being replaced late in the contest by pretty much anybody would be beneficial, but especially so when the player coming in for him is Harrison Bader, a guy with an 87th percentile fielding run value of 6. Certifiably elite. And it's not like Castellanos is being defended by the Philadelphia fanbase either, with quite a few coming out of the woodwork to express frustration with him on Twitter. When you have people who are supposed to be on your side rallying against your complaints, you know something's a little off. One last point I want to make here is that in a one-run game, the only real downside to taking Nick out would be that you'd lose his bat potentially if the contest ends up getting tied up. But considering that he's only rocking an OPS of exactly 700 this year in comparison to Bader's 800, there's an argument to be made that Philadelphia was actually upgrading its offensive potential as well with this move. I think one factor at play here is that since Nick is being paid like a borderline elite regular at $20 million a year, it's easy to forget that he has just a 734 OPS since he came to Philadelphia, and exactly 1.1 WAR, which is less than he managed to post in 1/3 of a season with the Chicago Cubs back in 2019. So yeah, seeing him feed into negative leading questions over this move by his manager certainly seems a bit tone deaf overall. I made a video earlier this season talking about how Jake Fraley of the Reds let a ball get past him with the bases loaded, and then just sauntered after it, making no real effort to hustle to mitigate the damage, resulting in the hitter, Sal Frelick, getting all the way to third base, and all 3 runs scoring. But at least he did go after the ball, right? That might sound like a funny thing to say, considering you'd assume that's the bare minimum. But O'Neal Cruz of the Pittsburgh Pirates just proved that there's a level even below what Fraley did, when the 6'7" center fielder not only let a ball get past him on the second hit of the game, but then didn't even go after it at all. Mike Burrows delivered a fastball outside to Sam Haggerty, who crushed it into center field, where O'Neal committed the fundamental error of playing it off to his side, allowing it to skip past him and head towards center field. But like I just said a couple seconds ago, he wouldn't follow this up with even a cursory effort to go get the ball. He just turned into a statue in center field, watching like a spectator as 26-year-old rookie Billy Cook hustled after it, attempting to keep Haggerty from rounding the bases completely, which he did successfully, but not before the lefty got to third base. Just look at the face that Burrows made while looking out towards Cruz after the play. You can tell he was pissed, and rightfully so. And to make matters worse, it would be consequential in that inning, because just 2 pitches later, Corey Seager would take a changeup in the dirt, with the ball skipping past catcher Joey Bart, allowing the run to score and irritating an already peeved Don Kelly. And this wouldn't even be the Pirates' only instance of fielding ineptitude in this contest, as leading off the 7th, Marcus Semien would send this fly ball to deep left center field, with Alexander Canario and O'Neal Cruz colliding as they attempted to field it off the wall, with Canario then slipping and having to flip the ball to Cruz, who, thankfully for Pittsburgh, was able to rifle in a missile to keep Semien at third. With how fast both of them got there, there's no way that should have been a triple, or at least not that easily. In case you couldn't tell by just the vibes of this game, they would indeed go on to lose by a final score of 6-2, with, somewhat appropriately, O'Neal Cruz being the one to end it on a bouncer to the first baseman. At least he ran that one out. With this loss, the Pirates fell to 30-47, 16 games out of first place in the NL Central, and 11.5 back from a wildcard spot, in what really appears to be another lost season in the Steel City. I'm not sure the last time I actually shared this on this channel, but I used to be a PO in high school, and I very much enjoyed being so. The thrill of punching out a hitter in a big spot, or watching a defense behind you make an exceptional play, and knowing that you largely controlled the pace of what was going on. But there was one thing I've tried really hard never to do, which is to show up the fielders behind me. You just are never going to have a good vantage point on how a ball was hit when you have to turn around and find it. But once in a while, I think we've all had a lapse in judgment. And that's what we just saw here recently in a game between the Padres and Mariners, when Yu Darvish, a veteran in his 13th year of Major League Baseball, sorta showed up as platinum glove right fielder by openly complaining about him not being able to get to a ball that was nearly uncatchable. Darvish was on the mound for only his 10th start of the year so far versus the Mariners, and being as how his numbers were pretty unimpressive by his standards, you know he was looking to make an impact in this one, and things would begin well for him as he retired the side 1-2-3 in the first inning. Side note, but look at that looping curveball, just a thing of beauty. Flash forward midway through the second inning now, and Darvish was giving up his first hit of the contest to Eugenio Suarez, a softly hit single to left field. Suarez would then manage to advance to second during Jorge Polanco's at-bat, with the switch hitter eventually striking out on another nasty curveball, putting Yu just one out away from getting out of this mini jam entirely. It was then that Luke Raley came to the plate, and on a 3-2 got a curveball up in the zone, which was flied to the gap in right center field, getting down and having to be grabbed on a hop by Fernando Tatis Jr. And then the exceptional wheels of Raley was enough to get him into second base with a hustle double. The big lefty actually has a sprint speed this year in the 85th percentile at 28.7 feet per second. At first glance, this probably seems like a pretty typical play, until you see on the replay that Darvish was caught saying, "What the F is that?" after the ball got down. Now, I'm not trying to be too hard on the veteran here. I think we've all as pitchers overreacted at times to hits that we would consider to be cheap or even unnecessary. But to this openly curse out your right fielder on a ball that was pointed out by the warmonger on Twitter to have just a 20% catch probability based on where Tatis was positioned pre-play is just a bad look, especially when Nando is currently 4th overall in Major League Baseball right now in fielding run value by an outfielder, angling himself well for another Gold Glove. I'm not making this to villainize Darvish, more so to just commentate on one of the fundamental flaws of hurlers everywhere. The assumption that we can even understand what balls should and shouldn't be turned into outs, despite never playing the field at a high level. But being that Yu has a reputation as an awesome teammate, I'm sure he apologized internally for this afterwards. As for the rest of the start, Darvish would go on to give up 4 runs in 4 innings, eventually seeing his team lose by a final score of 4-3 after a late game comeback attempt ended up proving fruitless overall. A loss that could end up being pretty huge in the race for the NL West title. Cross-ups are an unfortunate thing that used to be a relatively common problem in Major League Baseball. Every couple games, there would be a misunderstanding that would involve the pitcher and catcher not being on the same page with a certain pitch type being delivered. But this has largely gone the way of the dinosaur after the introduction of PitchCom, as these two parties now communicate directly, making it hard to cross up anyone. But we not only just saw one of these nearly extinct instances, but it seems it may have been done intentionally as a means of a hurler getting revenge on his game caller. Framber Valdez was on the mound in a 2-0 game, with the bases loaded and 1 out, and on a 2-2 to Giancarlo Stanton. He would punch out the righty on a racing changeup or sinker, I'm not exactly sure which, putting him 1 out away from getting out of trouble entirely. But it was then on a 1-0 to a player that's been clutch all year, Trent Grisham, that Valdez grooved a fastball right down the middle, seeing it crushed out to left field into the Crawford boxes, extending New York's lead to a much safer 6-0. That was Grisham's 3rd Grand Slam of the year so far, by the way. Now, on the surface, this seems like a pretty routine sequence, right? A pitcher just missed with his spot. But if you go back to the Houston broadcast, you can see his catcher, Cesar Salazar, telling him to step off before he even delivered the offering. Yet the lefty just went ahead and did so, and paid the ultimate price. This is obviously a stubborn move on his part, but if this is where things ended, nobody would be talking about it. But, you see, just 1 pitch later, we would see Salazar get handcuffed by a 93-mile-per-hour sinker right down the middle of the plate, with the catcher's immediate reaction being a stare out to the mound, which prompted Valdez to turn with an exasperated look on his face and walk behind the mound. Look at Caesar's reaction as he goes to deliver a new ball to the hurler. It certainly seems to me like he was peeved. And it's not like Framber was apologetic either, never even approaching his catcher to check if he was okay. And in case you might think this is a little soft of a request, consider what former professional catcher and current quality content maker Eric Sim had to say, being, quote, "If he did this on purpose after the catcher told him to step off, but instead refusing, then giving up a grand slam, F him. Especially when off-speed is called and throwing a sinker. I had a torn ligament on my thumb from one of those and was out for a year. Especially when you have the kind of movement Framber does, you absolutely cannot be doing things like this in any circumstance. Period. True psycho behavior." And of course, he would claim after the game that it wasn't intentional because, what was he supposed to say? I had an outburst and hit my catcher with a pitch intentionally? Of course not, but just based on his body language and pretty much every pundit's response to this, including former Major League player Dallas Braden, who believed it was 100% intentional, I think it's pretty safe to say it was so. This is going to go down as one of the all-time scummy teammate moves we have on video. And yeah, it's hard not to see it affecting his incoming free agency in one way or another. The Yankees would go on to close this one out by a final score of 7-1, saddling Valdez with a well-deserved loss as New York proceeded to overtake the Astros in record. Which means with the hard-charging Red Sox right behind them, if Houston doesn't manage to secure their tentative lead on their division, they could very well end up not making the playoffs at all. The Milwaukee Brewers punched their ticket to the postseason for the 7th time in the last 8 years yesterday, before their game even concluded. But, of course, in typical Brewers fashion in 2025, they would manage to put an exclamation point on the day as well by coming back to walk it off versus the Cardinals. But the real news, besides the clinching, was what happened after during the celebration, when longtime baseball personality Ken Rosenthal registered one of the douchiest moments you'll ever see from a media member. Milwaukee had just scored 3 runs in the bottom of the ninth, getting major help from 2 hit-by pitches, then registering back-to-back hits from Sal Frelick and Jackson Chourio, bringing the Brew Crew within 1. Then, after a shallow fly ball from Bryce Terang that couldn't manage to do anything, William Contreras would tie the game on a little swinging bunt. This would be where their rally would end after a strikeout from Christian Yelich and a flyout from Isaac Collins. Meanwhile, the Cardinals would manage to fill the bases with nobody out in the top of the 10th, but only come away with 1 after a double play and inning-ending groundout. This left a potential victory firmly within reason for the Brewers, who would tie it once again on a 1-out double from Caleb Durbin. This brought Andrew Monasterio to the plate, and he delivered, registering a 1-hop single to center field, officially sealing a walk-off victory. This brings us to the moment I alluded to in the intro, when Ken was interviewing Monasterio post-game, and, like is typical after walk-offs, the team came out with the Gatorade cooler and showered the young righty, but in the process, Ken was sent backward while trying to avoid the liquid, causing him to bump into a photographer trying to get some up-close images of the scene. But this isn't the douchiness I was talking about. It's the look he gives him immediately after, basically staring him down and then, as he walks to the side, giving him the classic, "What are you doing, man?" before shaking his head. Now, I'm not sure if the photographer was exactly where he was supposed to be, but it's an awfully mean-spirited thing to do to accidentally knock somebody over, and then instead of apologizing and checking to see if they're okay, to instead react like that, with zero concern for them whatsoever. Just a bit of a heartless moment from somebody who's had quite a few of them over the years. Now, before we go, Teoscar Hernandez had a horrible year defensively in 2025, being tied for the 5th worst defensive outfielder in Major League Baseball in fielding run value at -9, while at one point literally getting directly called out by one of the nicest managers in the game, Dave Roberts.
Yeah, that's just a tough one. I mean, he does. He's got to get better out there, and there's just no way to put it.
And it didn't help that his offense wasn't all that great either, with the veteran posting his worst OPS ever for a full season at .738. However, he didn't let any of that affect him in the wildcard round when he crushed a couple homers, seemingly resetting the narrative as the Dodgers looked to repeat as World Series champions. But there was a moment yesterday that made the entire baseball world question not only his fielding mechanics, but his commitment overall to the team, even if later on he would redeem this in spades. Facing Philadelphia in the first game of the NLDS, Teoscar was in right field when Shohei Ohtani put 2 guys on in the second inning after a walk to Alec Boehm and single by Brandon Marsh. This brought JT Realmuto to the plate, looking to give his team the lead, and he would do just that on the 1-0, lining a fastball right down the middle into the right center field gap. A ball that Teoscar raced over to cut off and then just pulled up at the last second, letting it get past him and go all the way to the wall, creating an easy opportunity for the still speedy catcher to get all the way to third base, almost scoring as a relay throw got away. The question that immediately had to be asked following this play was, what the hell was Hernandez doing? Why would you pull up and just start walking with the ball in your vicinity in one of your team's biggest games of the year? If he would have slid or something, he probably still could have kept the veteran catcher at just 2. Instead of an easy triple. Even the TNT broadcast couldn't believe that ball made it all the way to the fence.
I was surprised right here, BA. Watch this in right center. Hernandez kind of at the end I don't know if he took a bad angle on it, but this was a ball that I can't believe got all the way to the wall.
Just a horrible effort level from the veteran, and one that ended up turning into another run when Harrison Bader laced a sac fly to the track in left field. But that's the thing about the postseason that's so special. It gives players the stage to register the lowest of the low in terms of moments, but also the highest of the high, which is exactly what Teoscar would experience later on, as following Kike Hernandez, aka Playoff Barry Bonds, crushing a double to bring LA within 1. The big righty was up in the top of the 7th with 2 outs, after the Dodgers' 2 Hall of Famers in front of him had been retired. What would he do to shift the narrative? Well, how about on a 1-0, crushing a fastball center cut over the wall in right center field, giving his team the lead and a 2-run cushion. This also made him the first player in Major League history to have at least 3 home runs and 9 RBI in his team's first 3 games of a postseason. That would be all she wrote for Philadelphia, as Tyler Glasnow, Alex Vesia, and Roki Sasaki, who's been a revelation for them, managed to shut down the Philadelphia offense, not allowing another run after Ohtani departed in the middle innings. This put the 2024 champions just 2 wins away from getting back to the NLCS once again, as they attempt to go back-to-back in World Series wins for the first time for any team since 2000. The MLB Players' Choice Awards just came out a little bit ago, and while they're certainly not nearly as high profile in national stature as an MVP, Silver Slugger, or Cy Young, they are pretty telling about the state of culture throughout clubhouses in Major League Baseball. And judging by one selection in 2025, something is really off about how players view one specific person. I'm talking about Shohei Ohtani, who got passed over for the National League's most outstanding player for Kyle Schwarber. Now, before we get into the absurdity of this ridiculousness, I will acknowledge that the American League player chosen was Cal Raleigh, who you could make a decent argument had a worse overall year than Aaron Judge. But in my personal opinion, I don't think this is nearly as egregious. I mean, the dude hit 60 homers as a good fielding catcher for a team that was one game away from the World Series. That's objectively really impressive, especially to other players. However, you can't use the same argument for Kyle Schwarber, and I'll show you why with a 3-point argument. First up, batting production. You see this screenshot? These are the major numbers of both Philadelphia's hulking slugger and Shohei. This is in no way meant to slight Schwarbs, as every one of those totals on screen, aside from average and hits, are certifiably elite. Yet, none of his numbers, besides games played, home runs, and RBI, are even in the same stratosphere with a Japanese superstar, with his value being 3 full WAR behind him, along with an OPS almost 100 points less. My second point concerns base running, which, obviously on the surface, slants in Ohtani's direction again, with him swiping 10 more bases at a ratio of 20-10. But it's actually even more stark than that, because his base running run value, which takes into account when you're, running the bases in circumstances beyond just trying to steal them, was in the 93rd percentile league-wide with 4. For a little reference, that was better than Francisco Lindor. Meanwhile, Schwarber was at -2, tied with guys like Marcell Ozuna and Nolan Arenado. To put it simply, one guy was certifiably elite, and the other was far below average. My third, and I believe best point I could make has to do with appearing in the field. Now, you might be saying both of these guys are DHs, so how is that relevant? Well, you don't just hop between the white lines when you're on the infield dirt or in the outfield grass, right? This also concerns what happens on the mound, where Ohtani managed to put up a 2.87 ERA through 47 innings, with 62 strikeouts, and the best strikeout-to-walk ratio of his entire career. Now, it was a small sample size for sure, but I think we can all agree that a sub-3 ERA and sub-2 FIP through that amount of innings is certainly worth something, and a lot more than just sitting on the bench 154 times, which is what Schwarber did in 2025, to go along with 8 appearances in left field, where, by the way, he still managed to post a -3 fielding run value somehow. If I haven't convinced you by this point that this selection is ludicrous on its face, I don't know how I would. My big thing is, I just don't understand why Shohei's fellow players would disrespect him like this, as I really don't think there's any argument you could make for picking Schwarber over him. Is it jealousy? Maybe just burnout from hearing about him so often? I don't know, but it still certainly left a bad taste in my mouth upon hearing it. Now, do I think he personally gives a crap? No, not a single one. But still, I think it's important we hold everybody in the baseball space accountable, not just writers and pundits. And as such, I think it was worth pointing out just how wrong MLB's own players got this one.
Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.